very pleased to welcome a very special guest this afternoon, Sahar Dandan, Program Director for the Lebanese Muslim Association, who's here to help us celebrate National Unity Week. How are you, Sahar?
I'm well, thank you. How are you, Adam?
I'm excellent. I'm really glad you could join us for this special Western Sydney Digital Dialogue Unfiltered. We've had a great lineup of speakers today, but I'm very keen to get your views on this very special initiative this week, which we're rolling out. Firstly, before we get into National Unity Week, tell us a bit about yourself. I know you've got a very distinct background, coming from a very sort of specialised area in chemical engineering, and you've now moved into the community sector. So not a normal transition per se, but tell us a bit about how you got here and your background.
Thanks for having me, Adam. A little bit about myself. I was born in Australia to Lebanese migrant parents. I did spend my formative years in Lebanon. My dad returned to Lebanon when I was 2 years of age, and then we came back to Australia when I was 12 years old, barely speaking a few words of English, and we moved to the North Shore of Sydney, which was a very interesting experience to drop some children at.
We won't hold that against you, Sahar.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Listen, I'm a Western Sydney girl now, so don't hold that against me.
No, 100%.
And then, kind of transitioned through this kind of newly migrant experience, even though I was born in this country, and then ended up studying chemical engineering. I was slightly a bit of a nerd and did engineering and science, did a double degree at the University of Sydney. I've worked in food manufacturing, water treatment, industrial gases. My family used to tell me my first job was in vinegar production. And my family used to say, you need to change jobs because this, you always smell like fish and chips when you walk into the house, and the vinegar smell was, I stopped smelling it. And then I moved from engineering into water treatment. So from vinegar to water treatment.
Water.
That didn't go.
Well, they say oil and water don't mix, but I haven't heard about vinegar and water.
Well, vinegar and water mix, but they didn't like the vinegar smell. And when I moved into water treatment, the smell didn't improve. Finally went into industrial gases, and then there's no smell in that. So at some point during all of that, I started doing some volunteer work in community, and I traveled to West Africa and started doing some charity work in Australia to help people I knew in West Africa. In 2013, this volunteering became a full-time job. I'd written a number of programs that sort of got the ear of federal government at that time, and was given a bit of funding to run these programs that were called Engage, Challenge, Grow. So that's kind of how I transitioned out of some engineering work into working in the community sector.
Yeah, I mean, 1 minute you're dealing with gases and vinegars and water and all sorts of chemicals, and the next you're helping different communities and underprivileged sort of people. I mean, was there a particular trigger or something that happened personally to make you realise that this is where I want to be?
When I was working in engineering, I think during that period there were some serious landmark events that I would say that were occurring globally and across the Australian Muslim community that had quite a significant impact on the Lebanese community and the Australian Muslim community at large. We're talking Cronulla riots, September 11, lots and lots of stuff that were occurring. And I think, looking at what was occurring during that period and the shift in the dominant narrative surrounding these communities. In 2006, I moved for work, and I moved to Brisbane and entered into a workspace in a suburb on the outskirts of Ipswich, which was a really interesting experience because, growing up in Sydney, you don't get to see. I think we're very multicultural. There's a lot of kind of communities that operate together, and moving to Brisbane and walking into a company that have never had a Muslim female work for them, really change the dynamic of that space. And because of everything that was occurring, it was quite a challenging time for me to be in Brisbane. And I think when I returned to Sydney, I moved to Western Sydney.
And we've loved having you here ever since.
Oh, thanks so very much. And really kind of was the disparities that I was seeing between, these areas and the areas I grew up in was quite confronting. And I think interacting specifically with a lot of young Muslims in Western Sydney, there was this whole new generation that was growing in the shadow of all these events. And seeing the impact of how the public narrative and the political rhetoric and the media articles that was having on the community, and how it was not only being perceived externally, but it started to shift how the community was perceiving itself. And I think, being an engineer, one of the things we do is process modeling and having a look at, the large system in place and looking at variables that feed into those things and going, what is actually going on?
Putting the pieces of the puzzle together.
Yeah. And so we're supposed to have built those skills to do that, right? And doing root cause analysis and things like that. So I was interacting with young people who are negating their identity, who were normalizing living several identities, and there was this living under almost a shadow of pessimism, that there wasn't this kind of bright future for them. They didn't, I call it anchoring. They weren't feeling anchored to Australia as a country. And I think, the community at large was being racialized. We were being identified, as an aberration to the Australian way of life.
Yeah.
And these young people were feeling it. And I think it was really the otherizing of this community that I had just kind of now stepped back into and never actually grew up with. And I could see how much that otherizing was impacting them, really catalyzed, I think, the shift for me and why I shifted careers.
Yeah.
I call myself the accidental community worker. I didn't set out to be here, but I am, and I want to create something that has a positive impact.
Yeah. Obviously, I mean, you mentioned 2013, 2014, the start of your sort of journey with Lebanese Muslim Association. Is that sort of the starting point for you? And
2009 is when I started volunteering.
Yeah.
2013 is when I was given a job.
Yes, great. In terms of how far we've come since then, when it comes to the ideals of tolerance and acceptance and sort of belief, I suppose, as well. Where do you see how far have we progressed as a community, particularly in Western Sydney, where we are home to such a diverse range of cultures? Is it where you thought it would be, or are we behind, or how much room do we need to make up?
I mean, if we just were to look at data, I think we seem to be behind the 8 ball in a few of those stats around Western Sydney. I was just talking about youth unemployment, for example, in Western Sydney, which is something that we work with young people, especially newly arrived refugees and migrants. I think if I was to go and look at the average shift around Western Sydney, there's definitely been a positive shift in terms of, just seeing university campuses come up around Western Sydney. I think Western Sydney University's opened up a campus in Liverpool. They've just broken ground here in Bankstown. Yeah. And so I think there's definitely a positive shift. Is it as fast as I'd like to see it? Is the community? Probably not. But I think there's a lot of untapped potential in these communities, and I think there is a lot more work to be done that can be purposeful and effective in Western Sydney. Thank you for welcoming me into the area, but I feel like there's a lot of work still to be done, and there's a lot of gaps still in what we provide. And I think that needs to be a whole of kind of government society approach to seeing to changing the lens that we wear when we look at Western Sydney. And I think that's really important, the perspective and the prism by which we see the communities that live there. So, you know, it's kind of what I'm trying to do in my little kind of corner office in Lakemba, is to try and do some stuff that is purposeful and effective for these communities that live here.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of purposeful, nice segue into why we're here. Obviously, National Unity Week, great occasion, one that we look forward to. Talk us through that. Like, I mean, obviously, it has a role to play in sort of raising awareness of some of the issues you face, and I think more than anything, it's about telling your story and how it connects into the rest of society. The theme for this year's event is solidarity. Together we rise, which is rather apt given everything that we've been through. Talk us through what National Unity Week means this week and how far it's come along as an initiative that you kicked off back in 2013.
Well, it started off with kind of looking at there was two main events that were occurring around the same time. There was the Welcome to Australia event, and we had started the National Mosque Open Day event. And we did that because there was a particular narrative around our places of worship at the time, and what was happening inside of them. And I don't want to kind of go into the details, but we wanted to do something about opening up the doors of the mosque, and really kind of inviting people to come in. So out of that came National Day of Unity. A National Day of Unity incorporated and sort of bookended, incorporated National Mosque Open Day and the Walk Together events. In 2015, we launched it at Parliament House, actually, in Canberra, and it was by the then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. The opposition leader Bill Shorten was there. The Greens leader Dr. Richard Di Natale was there, which was a really kind of, I think, a historic moment for us as the Australian Muslim community, because the last time that all three political leaders were together prior to that was during the apology to First Nations people to this country for the stolen generations. And so this was kind of a really significant moment for us. And we thought we had a lot of communities that were there, from the Christian and Jewish and the Baha'i and other secular groups that really wanted to participate. And that's kind of where the idea of a National Unity Week came about. And I think, we wanted this year's theme. There's a lot of conversations that happen around Australia and how successful multiculturalism is. You can tell English is my second language, Adam. And this idea that we're really socially cohesive. I think we have a long way to go to really create a definition of what that looks like, and what it actually entails in terms of all groups that make up the social fabric of Australia. And there's conversations around, a sense of belonging, this idea of positive participation, this idea of feeling inclusive, being recognized. And I think, the Scanlon report, etc. There's this data that shows we do seem to be more inclusive, but I think we need to recognize that racism is still a pervasive issue in Australia, that Islamophobia over the last decade has risen, and that all of this is really an impediment to our national identity and the prosperity of Australia. And I think, we seem to kind of think this idea of solidarity and this idea of diversity and multiculturalism is sometimes they're pitted against each other. We kind of talk about multiculturalism as this champion of diversity and legitimacy for everyone. And this solidarity thing is seen as this idea that we need to create something, monochrome almost, and usually at the expense of migrants and minorities. So we really wanted to bring those concepts together, and that it's not at the expense of anyone, that a nation can be built on this idea of shared belonging and solidarity, that we can build a robust country and a state that can be diverse, can be inclusive, can look at togetherness, and that as a nation, we can rise together and we can build something much better for the future generations. And I think our role here is to go, what do we need to do today to ensure that future generations are in a better state than we are?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, 2020 has been a challenging year on numerous fronts. So, I mean, maybe it sounds a bit silly asking this, but is there a sense of optimism, that things are moving in the right direction, that Australia is becoming more inclusive, and maybe even Western Sydney, as the sort of leader or place where multiculturalism can work and can show the rest of Australia that this is a place where it can work? Is that a sense that you find that that's a message that you can sort of get across?
I mean, I think we wouldn't continue the work that we're doing if we weren't optimists to some level, right? And as I tell my people I work with, for engineers, the glass is always full. It's either water and gas that's in the glass.
It's a good one. I might use that.
Yeah, and so they use it now for me. Like, oh, hey, Sahar, the glass is always full, right? Yeah. The combination, it's an equilibrium between the water and the gases in there. But I think definitely Western Sydney. I see the vision of Western Sydney as this kind of microcosm that is diverse, and people do work together. And we've got people that work for the organisation that are not Muslim. We've got clients and people we service that are not Muslim. And I think one of the visions for us as an organisation that is called the Lebanese Muslim Association is what is the work that we can do so that we can be seen like a Catholic Care or an Anglicare or a Brotherhood of St. Lawrence, so that we can be seen as a mainstream organisation. And I think that's really, we've done a lot of work to go into that space, because I think that's a good measurement for successful multiculturalism, is that an ethno-religious based organisation that represents a minority community can service everyone. And I think Western Sydney is definitely a great, I don't want to call it the crucible, but a great place for those, for piloting those experiments.
Yeah. I think piloting is the right word, definitely, Sahar. Yeah. Thank you very much for your time today. Congratulations on all the work you've been doing through the Lebanese Muslim Association and through National Unity Week. Great initiative, obviously one that Dialogue is keen to support. Keep in touch, and good luck for the rest of the week.
Thanks very much, Adam. You take care.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.